So tonight, I welcome our guests, Liz McKinley and Deb Zanella. In this 60-minute session of WATAC Presents, Behind Stained Glass Doors, a conversation about domestic violence in the Australian Church. We're going to begin with a shared conversation between Liz, Deb and myself. We'll then go into breakout rooms and then come back, and there'll be time to share what we've shared and discussed in our breakout rooms. And you'll join in conversation with Deb, myself and Liz, and there'll be more time and for open discussion. I'm going to stay online at the conclusion of the conversation tonight, and WATAC is prepared to facilitate networking support for any issues that emerge during this evening's discussion. So I'm really, really pleased to introduce you tonight to Deborah Zanella and Liz McKinley. Liz McKinley has over 20 years experience in the not-for-profit sector with extensive senior executive experiences internationally and in Australia. She's held roles with a variety of not-for-profits, including World Vision International as Global Vice President of Strategy, World Vision Australia as Director of Indigenous Development, Australian Business Volunteers as Chief Executive Officer, International Red Cross Society in Cambodia as a Gender Specialist, and is a founder and board member of a community-run and funded domestic violence refuge in Sydney, Mary's House. Liz is advocating for change within Australian churches, considering the current domestic violence epidemic. Welcome, Liz. Deborah Zanella has over 2 decades experience in senior leadership roles in health and community services. Deborah lives in Perth. She's currently the Chief Executive Officer of Rural Community Services, a leading Western Australian community organisation that provides services principally in the areas of mental health, housing, family and domestic violence services. She's a founding member of the WA Alliance to End Homelessness. Deborah is a strong advocate for vulnerable and disadvantaged people. Welcome, Deb. So I'm going to begin tonight's conversation with a question for Deb. Can you begin, oh, sorry, for Liz, sorry, got that back to front already. I saw the look on Deb's face and it was, yeah, that's not me. So just begin by asking Liz, can you explain to us tonight what domestic violence is?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tracy, and hi, everyone. Thanks for WATAC for hosting this really important conversation. Domestic violence is a continuum of behaviour that's driven by a lack of respect, a denial of consent between partners in an intimate relationship, and that's founded in entrenched gender inequality. Domestic violence refers to acts of violence that occur between people who have or have had an intimate relationship. It includes the full spectrum of physical and sexual assault, other forms of abuse such as psychological, social and financial abuse. It's also important to note that it includes coercive control. Coercive control describes a pattern of behaviours that a perpetrator uses to gain control and power by eroding a person's autonomy and self-esteem. This can include acts of intimidation, threats, gaslighting and humiliation. Domestic violence at its core is about consent and respect and the deprivation of those by one partner to another. And in Australia, there are significant statistics where women are experiencing ever increasing rates of domestic violence at the hands of their male partner. Do you want me to keep, I can keep talking about domestic violence.
No, thanks so much, Liz. I just wanted to, I was just thinking as you were saying that, are there spiritualized aspects? You know, we're talking in a religious context here. Can there be spiritualized aspects to domestic violence as well?
Definitely. Some of the instances that I've seen and that research has shown is when perpetrators use the Bible or use church teaching as a way of controlling and abusing their partner, the Bible says you must submit to me, which means whatever acts I do, however difficult they are, physical violence, sexual assault, as my wife, my partner, you must submit to that, which is absolutely an erroneous reading of the Bible, but is commonly used by perpetrators within the church as a reason that they can get away with it. The other one as well is, if you're a good Christian woman, you'll forgive me. I might be doing this in a pattern and a cycle, but you're a good Christian woman, so you should forgive me. And for all of us as Christians, forgiveness is a critical part of our identity as followers of Christ. So it is a very difficult trap to get into. The third one is often domestic violence really relies on a culture of shame and the woman feeling very shamed and not wanting the church community who thinks her partner, her husband is a good bloke. He isn't actually a good bloke, but domestic violence perpetrators spend a lot of time convincing everybody else that they are good people, because it's solely about the control and lack of respect with their partner. To amplify that, they need that good public reputation, and often will use, if they're in a Christian church, will try to use their standing in that Christian community as another means of further isolating and controlling their wife or partner.
I can imagine that makes things very difficult, you know, for women in that situation. And I just want to flick to Deb, and I was just wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about who experiences domestic violence and why we're talking about this in a Christian forum. I remember really strikingly, I went, when I was doing some work in the gender violence unit at the University of Newcastle, I went down and we had white dresses laid out in front of Parliament House. And as I walked along those white dresses, it had the women's age and, you know, their occupation, like written on the white dress. And it struck me that there were 16-year-olds, that there were 80-year-olds, that there were doctors, that there were... So can you just share, like, who is it that experiences domestic violence?
Just before I do, I think there's two more things to add to Liz's comment. I think the issue of guilt in our tradition is something that keeps women in prison to relationships that are anything but fruitful and life-giving. And the use of the way, particularly, you know, my tradition as a Catholic, the role of women and having children and the use of children in that interplay of power of first control also needs to be recognised. But to your question, who experiences family violence, if you can just bear with me, I don't know how many times I read this issue out of prevalence, and still to this day, thank God, it still makes me it makes my stomach turn. So the issue of prevalence, family and domestic violence is still the leading cause of homelessness in women. And still in this country, one woman every week is murdered by an intimate partner. So that's, you know, I still can't get over that fact that one woman every week on average in this country is murdered by someone who is meant to care for them and love them. And we've not deemed that as a national social emergency. We've not, it's not, COVID is, and we know, and look how much resources have been poured into COVID, but we don't see this as a national emergency. Indigenous women are 32 times more likely to be hospitalised as a result of violence. 1 in 4 women have experienced emotional abuse by a current or former partner since the age of 15. 1 in 5 have experienced sexual violence since the age of 15. 85% of all Australian women have been sexually harassed. 40% of separated women from their partners continue to experience violence. And I don't know if you follow much in WA, but we recently had the murder of 2 children by the father, and he killed himself in a family where they were separated. The cost of FDV to the Australian economy is around $22 billion per year. The last 2 really strike me, they all strike me as horrendous, but the last 2 because, of course, when we're not on that majority of continuum, we tend to forget. So for people who identify as LGBTQI+, 92% of women will have experienced some level of sexual harassment. And the last one, women with a disability, 9 out of 10 women will have experienced some form of sexual harassment. That is what we call prevalence. That is the data across Australia. So I don't know if there's much more of a reason why we ought not to be talking about it. And as Christian women, and in our Catholic churches, from my tradition, it's almost like a no-brainer. If you look at that percentage of women, those women are sitting in the pews of our churches, or in prayer circles, or in Christian gatherings. They are there. And Tracy, I went back to the report that you were part of in that Anglican review that was done, or research that was done on FDV in the Anglican Church. And the data is compelling that they are in our pews. I think what often happens, and why this conversation is so important, it's important to understand the prevalence of the situation, because I think that brings a sense of urgency that should be on every leader's agenda. But it also means that we need to be upskilling ourselves. We need to have the capacity and the confidence to talk about and understand this particular situation and what's actually occurring. The other thing, as you can kind of tell from the prevalence, there's no postcode associated with violence against women. So it happens in high socioeconomic conditions and it happens in low socioeconomic conditions. So to say that this is just an issue for people who are poor or disadvantaged, the data just doesn't support that. You know, I think one of the other reasons I think as Christian women we need to talk about it because behind our concept of Christianity is an embedded patriarchal narrative and paradigm that has been in existence for over 2,000 years. And until we begin to unravel that, and we break that down systematically, things won't change in our society, let alone in our church. And without being disrespectful, James Carroll says, and I totally agree with him, we cannot trust the very people who created those patriarchal structures to undo them. So I think for me that they're just critical points about, you know, who is it and why should we be talking about this?
Yeah, I think the statistics were for the Anglican family of violence study that is actually more prevalent in the church communities that was studied, you know, from the evidence that they found there. So, you know, that's really compelling evidence that, you know, when we're in church on Sunday, you know, there's going to be people in the pews with us who are experiencing, you know, this type of violence. You know, Liz, now, are there aspects of church and Christian theologies that are contributing directly or indirectly to this? You know, we touched on a few things, you know, guilt, forgiveness, you know, what is it in our structures? And, you know, as Deb said, this tradition that goes back 2,000 years that is really, you know, hurting women and children in our society.
Yeah, look, it's a good question, Tracy. It goes to that fundamental point that Deborah's just made around a patriarchal structure, right? So what's the impact on a family where Sunday after Sunday only men preach? How does it affect the family to be told that only men can be the Imago Christi? What is it like to have all the decisions at the upper echelons of our church made by men? What that role models is that women must submit to men, that we are second class to an elite group of men that can make decisions. That for a survivor or a victim of domestic violence just reinforces the lack of control, the position that she's being put in that situation of violence. There's extensive sociological research that says for women and girls to participate more fully in public life, they need to see themselves in public. They need to, if they're going to be participating and in part of leadership, they need to see women in leadership. And in too many of our Christian churches, women are not in leadership. It's an exclusively male cohort. So the gender imbalance, the gender inequity, the patriarchal structures that exist within the church create conditions where it's very difficult for a woman's voice to be heard. It's very difficult for women to see that they have an equal place in the church, or that they could actually get themselves out of the situation of violence, because everything about the way the church is structured, from in our tradition, the Catholic tradition of solely male ordained priests, says, well, actually, you really are second class. You should submit. And so it is a structural issue, and it is, to use the phrase, the Hilton hotel chain could never have thought up Airbnb. So we need to think really differently, because, as Deb has said, the very people that have been inculcated into that structure are going to find it very difficult to find a solution to a different way of seeing men and women in equal leadership. And one of the points I would make, and I think it's an important one, is often when we talk about structural causes of abuse, it becomes very easy to say, oh, but I don't mean that, or I know all these good blokes. And there are a bunch of amazing ordained male priests who have nothing to do with the conditions that create domestic violence. It's not that. The issue is an exclusively male decision-making leadership group who reinforce by their existence as a fraternity where women are denied access, that women are second class and should always obey male decision-making. And if that's
can I jump in there to Liz as well,
please.
to say, you know, so often in this space, we remove the woman and the child. We focus all the resources when what really actually needs to change is the structure and the power used by male perpetrators in that particular space. So we still victim blame even when we're trying to support them. And I think we can see sort of parallels that even in sort of, you know, in Christian ministry and in Christian life as well. The other thing I'm just sort of got a level of discomfort about is that, you know, in our dawning understanding of sexuality and gender, which we really, as an institutional church, are even sort of preschool, we're nowhere even near high school in understanding its implication. This concept of male and female really needs to, again, to be worked into understanding what that looks like in different expressions and understanding of gender and sexuality. However, one can't take away from the fact that the reality, even though, you know, there are men who suffer at the hands of family and domestic violence, and certainly in gender diversity relationships, but unfortunately the data is still incredibly strong in terms of the fact that it is women that are dying one every week in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, having church structures, having the ability to have open conversations like this one, where we can actually talk about what is it about our churches that don't allow for courageous conversations. When I was putting together an article for a book that Andrea was putting together about woman and man and sort of what the position was for the Catholic Church, and I was writing about domestic violence, and I rang all of the Catholic social services that provide services, and they're wonderful, amazing services in domestic violence around Sydney. And every one of them, all women, said to me, oh, I can't comment. I'm not allowed to speak on behalf of the church. And to me, it was such a telling moment. These are the practitioners at the front line who are seeing the domestic violence. They're Catholic social services, and they weren't allowed to speak about what the church's position is. And so I really distinguished between this amazing cohort of practitioners, Catholic, Anglican, Baptist, all sorts, who are there on the front line doing the work, from this conversation about what the hierarchy and the structure and the decision-making of the church is. They're very different things, and it's the latter that I think we need to tackle if we're going to work out how to make the church a safe and inclusive place for women that are experiencing domestic violence.
Yeah, it's what's being modelled there in the pews. And, you know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking the masculinist language of the church, you know, in so many ways you know, even in the liturgy, you know, in the Catholic liturgy, at least women are raised. So we've got one just last question before we go to breakout rooms. So if you want to start to get those ready, Dan, and that is kind of what we're going to be talking about in the breakout room. Deb, did you want to just start us off with a couple of teasers about what we might be thinking about doing in our own church communities?
Yes. So I pulled up a piece of work actually while I was listening to Liz, and I will talk about just a bit more factual so people can have something to think about. But Rosemary Radford, she's got that wonderful quote that says, "Whatever denies, diminishes, or distorts the full humanity of woman is therefore appraised as not redemptive. Theologically speaking, whatever diminishes or denies the full humanity of women, and that is our bodies as well as our minds, must be presumed not to reflect the divine or the authentic relationship to the divine." Now, that reminds me a little bit of Rowan Williams' words as well. So if I take that and translate that into the question, then everything we do in our church community needs to reflect the full humanity of women. Our language, our understanding of women's bodies, our understanding of bodily theology, our attitude, the way we portray women. I feel like I'm going to make a confession. I'm still in the same parish of 55 years because my parents are still there. They're still alive. They refused to die at 97 and 87, so we're still going. And I had to listen to, Mary, Gentle Dove, whatever that hymn is that nearly sends me into apoplexy, the other day, and I just thought, what? And there was lots of young kids because it's quite a lovely community. But the imagery of women is still that same imagery that, for those of you on the screen who were pre-Vatican II, I'm still seeing, and I'm only 56. So we've got to look at our language, we've got to look at our images, we've got to look at the way we preach, what we preach. We actually have to address the social issues of the day within the teachings that occur. We have to, as Liz has said, we've got to address the issue of power and imbalances of power. So I think, depending on where you are in the world, it doesn't have to be big. It can be small. It can be informing myself of, the stuff that Liz talked about, getting an understanding, challenging myself. What are my views? So there's an individual responsibility that we have, and then collectively as a group, how we actually address those issues, and then how the structure of services or prayer groups or masses or whatever it is that we do, how do they reflect what Radford talks about, the full humanity of women? How is that reflected in the very things that we're doing?
Thanks so much, Deb and Liz. So we're going to go into breakout rooms now, and I'd invite you to start with a simple introduction. So make sure when you go into the breakout room, you turn your camera on so you can see who else is there. Spend some time listening and reflecting to each other. And the question that we'd ask you to reflect on is, what could your parish or faith community do to bring about change, to bring the full humanity of women into realisation, like what Deb was saying? So we're going in there for 10 minutes. There'll be a 1 minute alert, for when we're going to bounce back. So if you haven't done this before, I think everyone has now through COVID. It's a little bit strange. You're going to be, it's what Andrea said once, it's a bit like going through the flu on Harry Potter. So hang on and enjoy the ride, and we'll see you back in the main room in 10 minutes. Well, it doesn't look like anything's coming through on the chat. Okay, Rachel says she heard from women who were feeling empowered, and others were feeling ignored. So there's lots of mixed experience here. Andrew's come up with the idea that we get a petition together so that leadership take this issue more seriously. There's a comment there that the relationship between the priest and parish sometimes fits the criteria for coercive control, and yeah, that is really worrying. Like that, you know, can happen very easily. And yeah, there are lots of people in our church communities, ministers, priests, and even some members of our community and our political leaders as well. We mentioned Grace Tame earlier, that just don't want to know anything about this. And yeah, how can celibate men understand women as wives and mothers? You know, there's a lot of truth there, you know. That, you know, hope, you know, we're looking at the idea of hope, and yeah, that's an interesting one, Eleanor, whether asking women to report back whether they're hearing in the pews about domestic violence, and yeah, and yeah, for those who don't believe that domestic violence happens in the parish, go to the police and social services, definitely. You know, if you are in a parish community and you know something's happening and somebody's in danger, that's definitely what you need to do. You know, in our group, you know, Liz and Deb and I were chatting, and we were talking about how during COVID, you know, we effectively have a shadow pandemic of domestic violence. And I made a comment about how we're so shocked about these deaths that are happening from COVID. You know, we're forgetting the large number of women that, you know, are dying of domestic violence, and, you know, we're not seeing the same response from our political leaders. When I put this meeting together, someone who approached me was Tracy McLeod-Howe from the Diocese of Parramatta. She's the head of safeguarding in the Diocese of Parramatta and was previously the CEO of Domestic Violence New South Wales and Wimmera Women and Children's Refuge in the Blue Mountains. And she just wanted to share with the group here about an app that the Diocese of Parramatta have released. Dan, could you spotlight Tracy so she can chat with us and share a little bit about the app? Tracy, did you want to let us know?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity. So I think it all starts from good leadership, and I always want to give a good shout out to Bishop Vincent Long because he is very open to any ideas or education that we can furnish our diocese with in relation to protecting women and children. One of the things that we were fortunate enough to build was an app called Iris. And Iris is really just a copy of a government app, which is to support women journal their relationship experiences, give them emergency numbers. But we've framed Iris in terms of, it's for Catholic women. So we have some quotes from the Bible. It's engaging. It also has quick exit function. And the actual visual of the app is very innocuous, so it wouldn't be something that a perpetrator or someone who's stalking your phone would immediately think, oh gosh, this is some kind of help app, you know, to get this woman to be noting about her DV. But what we have found is that our priests have been very thankful. So the clergy have been thankful to have something that is real they can offer. It's also a discussion point, and it's something that is included in some of their homilies. And we've produced posters, and the whole thing has had a knock-on effect. And we even had Rosie Batty, who launched this for us because she saw the importance of the fact that women can start to monitor what is going on in their relationships, and that goes to coercive control right through to physical violence, and start to see where there are things behaviors that are unhealthy for them. And we always say that it's not just about family. I think we miss that point. We so often in the Catholic faith, this focus on family, which is often to the detriment of women and the children, who have even less voice than the women. And can I say, at the Commission on the Status of Women, the Holy See loves to try and replace the word woman with bloomin' family, and it drives me mad, but that's another story. So
okay, thanks so much. Thanks so much for that, Tracy. We really appreciate it. Has anybody got any, we've just got a couple of minutes for questions, if there's any questions from anyone in the group here tonight. You're welcome to unmute yourself and just speak up, or if you want to put them in the chat. And Tracy, could you share the link to the chat, to the app in the chat function, please, so that people can access that and share it with their communities?
Tracy, can I just make one point about one thing we didn't talk about earlier is technology abuse. Yeah. So it is rampant, and it is probably one of the major ways that perpetrators are tracking their partners. So one of the very first things we do when someone comes into our refuge is we take their phone, and they get a completely new and non-traceable phone. The whole area of tracking through cars and phones, yes, has taken it to a whole new level. So I just put that in as we think about how technology also enables domestic violence.
Thanks so much, Liz. Does anyone have any questions or anything that they wanted to add there? Just unmute yourself and you can talk, or put a
the research that you did into the Anglican Church, how has that been received? Because I saw one negative response, but I don't know, have there been various responses?
I'm like not in the context of the Anglican Church, so I'm not 100% sure. But they do have an action committee, and you might be able to have a look on the Anglican. I'll try and get the report. I'll just Google it, and I'll put the website that I'm referring to in the chat. But I know that they have a committee that is responding to it, but I don't know exactly what specific actions they've taken. Yeah, so I'm a researcher, so I did there was 3 studies done: a prevalence study, a clergy study, and an experience study, and I worked on the experience study. And as far as I'm aware, the Anglican Church has a committee and that is developing an action plan. But we know in church communities that has a long history. So, all we can do is hope that this is like a major turning point for them. And one of the things that we recognised in that experience study was that, there are moments and points of where people in communities can help women, where they call it emerging from the underground, where women kind of there's red flags that you can see where people in the community can reach out and help. So Patty's got a question, so I'll go to Patty and I'll pop that in the link to that in the chat for you.
It's not a question, Tracy. I just realised as I was trying to think, what could I do in my parish? We in our offices, I'm a member of a religious congregation, and we have these Esker bags, and there's a sign up on the outside, that because often women fleeing violence don't have time, they're so closely monitored, they don't have time to pack a bag in order to go to a safe place. And I was just thinking, look, this could be a conversation starter with my parish priest, just to even raise the awareness and to ask, would the parish become a place where women can get these bags? Because often it's said that if it's seen by their partners to be packing a bag, and they also have some that if they've got children as well. And, you know, anything I think to have a conversation with the parish priest, because they're the gatekeepers, could be, that's just for me, is going to be a way in.
I think that's really important, Patty. I think any steps, you've got to understand the framework in which you operate and live in parishes that you belong. And so we just need to continually influence and begin and change the conversation until really the conversation becomes the dominant narrative, which is this is just not okay, and we've got to be a part of the solution.
Yeah.
So,
and oftentimes, I think people, I think particularly, you know, male ministers don't have the skills, haven't been trained in what to do. You know, don't underestimate the journey we're all on working this out. So I think even approaching it as, can I have a conversation with you about what is happening to women? And it is going to be happening to women in our parish. So let's talk about that and work out how to have the skills in the parish to carry the conversation forward. I think going in with a position of helping skill up people for conversations is really important, because it's really fraught. So we want to make sure we walk forward, you know, pushing this movement forward, but also giving people the skills across ministers, across people in the parish around how to do it in a safe way.
Are there, like I noted, like when we had in the experience study, that sometimes having key resources in like the back of the church and things like that. So there's actually pamphlets about where people can go and what they can do and who they need to call. You know, you never see, well, I've never seen in a parish bulletin, like on the back of a parish bulletin, you know, what to do if you're in a situation of family or domestic violence. Mm-hmm. And, you know, why not? Like, why not? You know, we certainly have hotlines, you know, about, you know, becoming a catechist, or, you know, there's other numbers there, you know, that, and it's only a small little box on the back of a parish bulletin, and it might make a massive difference. But I think that,
Tracy, I think if I just add to that, you know, imagine if every parish in Australia in the 16 days in November, which is the International Elimination of Violence Against Women, everyone wore orange, everyone was on that every parish in Australia, how powerful that would be as a movement. And it doesn't really, you don't have to do too much, and an opportunity to increase understanding and to participate in what is a global movement that is increasingly gaining a bit more awareness. So
yeah, no, it's like I was just thinking that, you know, Voices of Faith did the 16 days, and I was part of that, talking about spiritual violence last year. And when I spoke to Chantel Goetz a couple of weeks ago, she was telling me that it was not picked up in the Catholic media at all. It was just, in terms of the Catholic media, it was a complete non-event. Yeah. And, you know, one of the projects that I want to do this year is looking at media training for women in WATAC, because we need to learn as women to amplify our voice. We need to know how, when we're asked our opinion on something, how to speak it, you know, speak about these issues in a safe way for us, so that we don't lose our jobs like what those women were worried about when you were talking about, Liz. I just want to end on one final thing. We've only just got a couple of minutes to go, and we've got some thank yous, so we'll probably go just over time. But I just want from you both, like, is there hope? Like, what do you have hope that things will be different? Like, what's our light at the end of the tunnel? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel?
I'll go, because what I see tonight, this is the hope. Yeah, the fact that so many people gave up an hour of their night when we're all busy, the fact that we're having these conversations, and, you know, it started with Rosie Batty and Grace Tame's taken it forward, and Brittany Higgins, and there is hope, but it takes courage, and it takes people that are willing to not lose yourself to the fight, but keep going, keep finding those people that are going to walk with you on this journey. And tonight gives me an enormous amount of hope.
And I have two reasons why I have hope. It's because I owe it to every woman who has ever come through our services and has entrusted their care to us. And secondly, because I'm a believer in Rowan Williams' comment that when human failure occurs, when we can't be who we are, then an aspect of the divine doesn't come into being. And as a woman of faith, I just can't allow that to happen. So yes, I do have hope.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks. I just want to thank Andrea and Danielle and Emily and the members of the WATAC committee who provided practical and technical support for WATAC Presents tonight. You're all welcome to join us in March for WATAC in Dialogue. And if this is your first WATAC event, you know, I encourage you to check us out on Facebook and on our website and come along and be part of our community. You're very welcome.